Carpenter. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join me on this week's video. On this week's video, we're discussing the anything goes rules of apportionment. It's going to be an extremely valuable session for you because qualified medical evaluators of all specialties in all reaches of the state of California tell me that universally, collectively, and as a group, qualified medical evaluators consider the apportionment determination, meaning coming up with their apportionment approximate percentages, to be the most difficult issue that they face in completing their QME reports. And for some reason, qualified medical evaluators struggle greatly with the apportionment determination, to the point that it almost becomes too difficult for them to be able to confront and face, and therefore many qualified medical evaluators let the report sit on their desk until the day before the report is due, and typically they'll sit down finally to confront the apportionment determination, typically on a Saturday or a Sunday when they should be otherwise engaged in other non-work activities, and they pull their hair out and wrangle and wring their hands in trying to come up with a reasonable, cogent argument as to their apportionment approximate percentages, whether those percentages be 100-0, 90-10, 80-20, 70-30, etc. Qualified medical evaluators struggle greatly with the apportionment determination. And the purpose of today's discussion is to simplify and remove all of that anguish from your medical's decision making so that you can quickly and accurately get to apportionment approximate percentages that are true, that are correct, that are accurate, and that you feel comfortable and confident to defend, even should it come to deposition, where one or the other parties attempts to grill you and saute you and fillet you and wide open your apportionment determination. And you can stand comfortably in the face of such harsh scrutiny on your medical decision making that you feel and that you're confident that you have indeed provided the approximate percentages that are true and correct given the facts of the case. And I tell qualified medical evaluators that it's okay to change your opinion when you're presented with new facts, but based upon the facts that you have at the time and at your disposal, when you write your report and when you write your apportionment argument and provide your apportionment approximate percentages, that based upon the facts that are available to you at that time, that the apportionment approximate percentages that you provided in your report are the most accurate, are the most true, and are the most correct. So in order to simplify your apportionment approximate percentages and your apportionment determination in your report, I want to share with you a couple of basic ideas that will help you in fashioning and in writing your apportionment argument within the body of your report. And I want to talk to you first about the concept of substantial medical evidence and how to fashion your apportionment argument such that it constitutes substantial medical evidence, so that number one, first of all, the opinion can be used by the parties, because if your opinion does not constitute substantial medical evidence, then it cannot even be used by the parties. So that's number one of paramount importance, that your apportionment approximate percentages be fashioned in such a way that your opinion qualifies as substantial medical evidence. So that's number one. And then number two, some basic principles about apportionment as described in Labor Codes 4663 and 4664, which, if we look at the language of these two laws under the microscope, it gives us great insight as to how the apportionment process can be approached and how you can use the apportionment process and the language of these laws combined with your new knowledge about substantial medical evidence to create a formula for yourself, a recipe for yourself, a paint by the numbers procedure that you can use in every single case to arrive at true, accurate, and correct apportionment approximate percentages in a manner that's quick, that's easy, that's effortless, that you can use repeatedly over and over again with each and every evaluation that you perform that involves a permanent impairment opinion. In every case that involves a permanent impairment opinion, as you know, we're required to provide an apportionment determination. So in each and every one of those cases, the apportionment determination and your argument within the body of your report can be simple, can be quick, can be effortless, can be systematized, such that you can get it done and get it in the mail and get paid and get on with the next evaluation. So that's our agenda, and those are our topics for today. Let's begin with a few pieces of information regarding substantial medical evidence as we continue with today's program entitled The Anything Goes Rules of Apportionment. Okay, so let's begin today's discussion with some emphasis on topics related to substantial medical evidence and topics related to both Labor Codes 4663 and 4664 regarding apportionment. Now, I have several references for you to accompany today's discussion. One of the principal references, and I know you've heard of this case, is the Escobedo versus Marshall's case. And the Escobedo versus Marshall's case is probably the precedent landmark case. It was an en banc decision, meaning the conclusions of the Escobedo case are binding upon all of the courts throughout the state of California. And it's the Escobedo case that provides our blueprint, our recipe, and our formula for our apportionment approximate percentages, and we're going to get into that in just a few slides from now. And I have provided these references for you in your course materials today. But before we even get into the formula and the recipe, let's go over a critical quote from the Escobedo case that provides us some basic principles upon which we can rely when it comes time for us to fashion our apportionment argument within the body of our report. So Escobedo tells us that in the context of apportionment determinations, and let's just stop right there. In the context of apportionment determinations, apportionment determinations become in context in those cases wherein we opine for permanent impairment. When the examinee has a permanent impairment, we're required by law, and I'll share that law with you here in just a few slides, we're required by law to provide an apportionment determination. So in the context of apportionment determination, meaning in those cases that involve permanent impairment, the medical opinion must, number one, it must disclose familiarity with the concepts of apportionment, and I'll show you exactly how to do that. And number two, and this is critical, it must describe in detail the exact nature of the apportionable disability. You must describe in detail the exact nature of the apportionable disability. Now, in that sense, if you don't have an apportionable disability, meaning the examinee does not have permanent impairment, or meaning the examinee is not even permanent and stationary and a permanent impairment rating cannot be established, can you provide an apportionment determination? No. You must describe first, step number one, the exact nature of the apportionable disability. So the first step for you in getting clear on your apportionment approximate percentages is to first and foremost be clear as to what is the exact nature of the apportionable disability and how you describe the disability, and we can use the word impairment as a substitute for disability. How you describe the impairment greatly impacts your apportionment approximate percentages. In fact, you can describe the same examinee with one description of the impairment that will demand and command some apportionment of that impairment, whereas if you use a different description of the examinee's impairment, that particular description could completely escape apportionment. And I've had many cases where I struggled with different descriptions of the impairment because I wanted to create a different outcome with the apportionment approximate percentages. So step number one in handling your apportionment section in your report is to be very, very clear as to what is the exact nature of the apportionable disability. So describe in great detail and exacting language what is your examinee's disability or impairment. Number 3, it must set forth the basis for the opinion so that the board can determine whether the physician, meaning you, is properly apportioning under correct legal principles. So let's extract the principles from this particular passage. Principle number 1 is to be clear on the nature of the disability or the impairment, and get that argument in your report fully established in advance before beginning to consider the apportionment of that disability or impairment. And then number 2, you must set forth the basis for your opinion. In other words, the parties, when you offer your opinion, the parties are like little kids. When you tell a little kid something, the little kid always responds with, well, why? Well, why, Daddy, or why, Mommy? Or how, Daddy, or how, Mommy? How and why? And you must explain how and why and give the basis for your opinion, because ultimately your opinion is going to result in some dollar payout and some dollar received from one or more of the parties, and therefore your reasoning and your basis better be good, because many dollars are based upon your reasoning. And so the basis for your opinion has to be irrefutable and ironclad. And this brings us to the concept of substantial medical evidence. And I know that many of you have heard this term, and you might feel that you have some idea as to what this term means. But let's break down what actually constitutes substantial medical evidence and how you can use the ingredients of substantial medical evidence to formulate your own apportionment approximate percentages. Now, with regards to substantial medical evidence, there's several cases that are landmark and reference cases to describe what actually constitutes substantial medical evidence. And I've included all of these cases for you within your handout materials for today's discussion. So let's go through some of these cases one at a time. Of course, the most important of which is going to be, as I said earlier, Escobedo versus Marshalls. But all of these cases provide us some philosophy and some language as to how we can fashion our apportionment approximate percentages and our argument within the body of our report, such that that argument constitutes and qualifies as this lofty ideal, this high standard, this high bar of substantial medical evidence. Okay, so let's take a look at these references here one at a time. Okay, so one of the references that we rely on in order to help us understand substantial medical evidence is the Garza case. Now, the Garza case tells us that any award, any order, or any decision of the board, meaning the Workers' Compensation Appeals Board, must be supported by substantial evidence in light of the entire record. So what does this mean? What this means is that down at the board, in front of judges, whether we be talking about workers' compensation judges or the Workers' Compensation Appeals Board, a higher level of court that handles appealed cases, any order, any decision coming from these courts and boards must be based upon substantial medical evidence. So judges and the courts look to our opinions, look to our medical opinions within the body of our reports. First, number one, they look at our opinions to determine, number one, does this opinion rise to the level of substantial medical evidence? In other words, they step back from the interior language of the opinion. They don't get into the content of the opinion. They first look at the opinion to see if the opinion meets the standard of substantial medical evidence. You could analogize this to saying that it's like looking in a bag of balls, maybe at your gym class or what have you, for a blue basketball. You open up this bag of balls, and there's many basketballs in there, most of which are orange, and you're looking for one unique basketball that's colored blue. And you can spot this blue basketball from a distance because of its specific quality of its color. Okay, similarly, the judges and the courts look to our opinions to see if our opinions are blue basketballs. In other words, they have the quality and the character of substantial medical evidence. And this is even before the judges and the courts look to the content of the opinion. They look to see if the opinion, first of all, is a substantial opinion. If it's a substantial opinion, then the judges and the courts can then dissect the opinion and look for the content of the opinion and use the content of the opinion. But before they even get into the content of the opinion, they have to determine whether or not the opinion meets a certain standard. And the standard is the substantial medical evidence standard for opinions. And I'll show you exactly how to fashion your argument so that it qualifies as substantial as we proceed with today's discussion. Now, the Zemke case tells us that an opinion that does not disclose its underlying basis and gives a bare legal conclusion does not constitute substantial medical evidence. Now, imagine that you're at a backyard barbecue and you're talking with some of your friends, and one of your friends makes the statement that the 49ers suck. Okay? He comes out and he says the 49ers suck. And you ask him or her, what is your underlying basis for stating that the 49ers suck? In other words, could you please disclose your basis for your bare conclusion, that the 49ers suck? What is your basis? And if your friend at the backyard barbecue simply says, well, that's just my opinion, and I can tell you I've watched a lot of football games, and the 49ers suck, okay? And that is what constitutes a bare legal conclusion that has no underlying basis for that opinion. Now, on the other hand, if your friend at the backyard barbecue says, well, that the reason that the 49ers suck is because their quarterback has the lowest quarterback passing rating in the league. Additionally, their defense is rated in the bottom 2% of the league. Last year, they gave up more rushing yards than any other team in the league. And then the backyard barbecue friend gives his basis for the opinion. The more bases, plural for basis, the more bases that he provides to support his opinion, the more substantial becomes the opinion. So you must disclose your underlying basis and not simply provide bare legal conclusions. With regards to the apportionment approximate percentages, the bare legal conclusion would be something similar to the following. It would be like, in my opinion, 10% of the permanent impairment is due to the industrial injury, and 90% is due to other factors, period. That's the bare legal conclusion, and that's the start of your apportionment argument. But after that, you must provide the underlying basis that supports the legal conclusion, or in our case, the medical conclusion. In the West case told us that an expert opinion is no stronger than the facts upon which it is based. So this gives us some insight that in qualifying our opinion as substantial medical evidence on apportionment approximate percentages, our opinion is going to have to be supported by facts. It's going to have to be supported by strong facts. It's going to have to be supported by voluminous facts. It's going to have to be supported by compelling facts. And I'll show you exactly how to do just that. Finally, the Granado case tells us that a mere legal conclusion, the 49ers suck. The apportionment is 10% to the industrial injury. The bare legal conclusion does not form a basis for a finding, and the courts and the judges cannot use simply the legal conclusion when that legal conclusion is not supported with some underlying bases. Okay? What other cases do we have that tell us about how to fashion our opinions and conclusions such that they qualify as substantial medical evidence? Well, let's take a look at a couple more. The next case that gives us insight as to how to qualify our opinions and conclusions as substantial medical evidence is the Bassett case. The Bassett case tells us that the chief value of an expert's testimony, such as us as qualified medical evaluators, we're medical experts, the chief value of our testimony rests upon the material from which our opinion is fashioned and the reasoning. Key word is the reasoning. So in your apportionment determination, in your argument, you're going to want to cite the reasons for your opinion and your conclusion. The reason why you opine that 50% of the impairment is due to the industrial injury, that's reason number one, and reasons why the other 50% is due to other factors. Each of your numbers associated with your apportionment approximate percentages must be supported by reasoning that explains how you progressed from the material to the conclusion. And it does not lie in the mere expression of the conclusion. 10% is due to the industrial injury and 90% is due to other factors. That's the mere expression of the conclusion. You must also include your reasons as to how you arrived at those numbers. Therefore, according to Bassett, the opinion of the expert is no better than the reasons upon which it is based. So I want you to start thinking in terms of your reasons and your reasoning. Whenever you provide an opinion or conclusion within the body of your report, always tell the reader of the report the reasons for your opinion or conclusion. And the more voluminous and the more compelling are your reasons, in other words, you have voluminous reasons, many, many reasons, and those reasons are compelling, and especially when those reasons are based on facts, then your opinion approaches the lofty ideal of substantial medical evidence. Okay? So let's take all of these cases together and put them together and bring this to a final conclusion and add that to the conclusion of the Big Daddy case of them all, which is the Escobedo case, and let's see how we can start to construct our recipe and formula for our own apportionment approximate percentages. Okay, so let's talk about the Escobedo case, and this is going to really help drive the concept of conclusory opinions versus substantial opinions home to you. Conclusory opinions is, again, the 49ers suck, as told to you by the friend at the backyard Saturday afternoon barbecue. The conclusory opinion without support, contrasted with the substantial opinion, the blue basketball, the readily identifiable opinion that's supported by reasons and facts and reasons and facts and voluminous and compelling reasons and voluminous and compelling facts that support the opinion, the substantial opinion. And remember, when it comes to your apportionment approximate percentages, you have to have a substantial opinion, number one, as to why there should be apportionment to other factors, and it should be supported by voluminous and compelling reasons. And then voluminous and compelling reasons that support your approximate percentage due to the industrial injury, and voluminous and compelling reasons that support your approximate percentage due to other factors. Every single opinion and every single conclusion must be supported by reasons and facts. Otherwise, that conclusion, that opinion, qualifies only as a conclusory opinion and does not qualify as a substantial opinion. And I want you to think about the backyard barbecue scenario again, where your friend tells you that the 49ers suck, and as your friend adds statistics and facts and reasons and voluminous facts and voluminous statistics, the more voluminous and compelling are the facts and statistics, the more believable, the more true is the opinion that the 49ers suck, okay? And then if someone is going to come along and create a case to the opposite, that the 49ers are fantastic, they better have more compelling and more voluminous statistics and facts to overcome this already substantial opinion, which was based on voluminous and compelling facts. And this is how these decisions are handled down at the courts and in front of judges. Judges simply look for opinions and conclusions that are supported by voluminous and compelling facts. And then when that's the case, that becomes an opinion upon which the case can be resolved until some other counter argument comes along that's more compelling and more supportable. Okay? So let's see what Escobedo has to say about substantial medical evidence. Escobedo tells us in order to constitute substantial medical evidence, a medical opinion must, number one, it must be predicated on reasonable medical probability. So this is a formula, this is a recipe that we can use. Every single time in the body of your report, when you offer an opinion and a conclusion, always predicate that opinion and conclusion with the phrase with reasonable medical probability. So you would say, in my opinion, comma, within reasonable medical probability, comma, and then provide the conclusory portion of the opinion. In my opinion, within reasonable medical probability, 50% of the permanent impairment is due to the April 1st, 2020 industrial injury, comma, and 0% is due, and 50% is due to other factors, period. And that becomes the conclusory portion of the opinion, but you've began to qualify it as substantial by first predicating it on reasonable medical probability. Now, when you predicate your opinion on reasonable medical probability, you're telling us that that opinion has a 51% or more likelihood of being correct. So don't provide an opinion and don't predicate it on reasonable medical probability if it doesn't at least meet the 51% or greater threshold. If it does meet the 51% or greater threshold, that opinion is on its way. It's not all the way there yet, but it's on its way to being a substantial opinion. So let's take it the rest of the way with some of the criteria from Escobedo. Escobedo tells us that a medical opinion is not substantial medical evidence if it's based on facts that are no longer germane, okay? Old, outdated facts that aren't relevant anymore. So what's the opposite of facts no longer germane? The opposite of that would be facts that are currently germane, facts that are currently relevant. So your opinion to qualify as substantial medical evidence must be based on facts that are germane. We refer to those as relevant facts. Okay? Next, an opinion is not substantial medical evidence if it's based on an inadequate medical history or inadequate medical examination. So what's the opposite of an inadequate medical history? The opposite of that is an adequate medical history. So take an adequate medical history, and the medical history will be adequate when it contains facts and reasons that support your opinion or conclusion. What about an inadequate examination? What's the opposite of an inadequate examination? The opposite of an inadequate examination is an adequate examination. An adequate examination that comports to the AMA guides and the procedures described in the AMA guides. And an adequate examination will provide facts that support your opinion and conclusion. An opinion is not substantial evidence if it's based on incorrect legal theories or if it's based on surmise, speculation, conjecture, or guess. So when you provide your opinion or conclusion in your report, always ask yourself, is there any portion of this opinion that's speculative? Am I guessing on any portion of this opinion? If the judges in the court smell speculation, then the opinion will not qualify as substantial and it cannot be used. And you know, in life, we speculate all the time. If you just observe some conversation with your friends, with your family, with your spouse, we use speculation all the time. So you should begin to become attuned to speculation within the conversation of people around you. And at least as regards your apportionment approximate percentages, remove guessing, remove speculation, remove conjecture from your opinion and conclusion, and that will more qualify your opinion and conclusion as substantial. Finally, a medical report is not substantial evidence unless it sets forth the reasoning behind the physician's opinion, not merely his or her conclusion. So I'm suggesting that you begin your apportionment determination with the following phrase, which will begin to comport with all of these criteria described in Escobedo. You would say, in my opinion, within reasonable medical probability, 50% of the apportionment, 50% of the permanent impairment is due to the April 1st, 2020 industrial injury, comma, and 50% is due to other factors, period. Reasons for this conclusion include colon, and now below this, you're going to cite your voluminous and compelling reasons to support those apportionment approximate percentages, and you're going to cite the facts from the history, the facts from the exam, the how and why reasoning that supports the opinion and conclusion. And the more voluminous and the more compelling are your reasons, the more true, accurate, and correct, and the more substantial will be your opinion on the apportionment approximate percentages. So here is the winning formula that we derive from all of these cases, and especially from the Escobedo case. So here's the winning formula from Escobedo, and this is an exact recipe that you can use to fashion your apportionment approximate percentages. Number one, predicate your opinion of the apportionment approximate percentages on reasonable medical probability. Number two, cite the facts that are relevant in support of your apportionment approximate percentages. Now, relevant facts is an interesting concept. Relevant facts are different than facts, and many times when I work with qualified medical evaluators on the apportionment argument, qualified medical evaluators, when I ask them to provide me relevant facts, will provide facts from the history, facts from the exam, facts from diagnostic studies. And while those facts are factual, in other words, they're actual facts, they're not actually relevant facts because they're not relevant in supporting the apportionment approximate percentage numbers. So the facts that you cite must support your particular percentage that you provided in your report. Why is it? What are the facts that support a 50% apportionment to the industrial injury? What are the facts that support 100% of the impairment to the industrial injury? What are the facts that are relevant to your conclusion that 0% of the impairment is due to the industrial injury? The relevant facts are only relevant in the sense that they support the apportionment approximate percentages. Make sure that you have an adequate history and an adequate examination, and predicate your conclusion, your apportionment approximate percentages, on facts from the history and on facts from the exam that support your particular numeric percentages. The opinion must not be speculative, must not be based on surmise, conjecture, or guess. And so as you review your apportionment argument, make sure that every opinion that you offer is supportable and is not speculative. That it's supported with facts and how and why reasoning. And that brings us to our final step. Your apportionment argument and your apportionment approximate percentages, both percentages, the percent due to the industrial injury and the percent due to other factors, must be explained with how and why reasons. And you must have reasons why 50% is due to the industrial injury and why 50% is due to other factors, and explain to the parties exactly how and why you arrived at your particular apportionment percentages, approximate percentages. So this helps us to qualify our opinion, whatever our opinion on our apportionment approximate percentages, as substantial medical evidence. So we have the ingredients to a persuasive and powerful argument now at our disposal using these criteria from Escobedo. Let's now take a look at the apportionment process itself by dissecting some of the language of Labor Codes 4663 and 4664. Okay, so our two apportionment laws upon which we rely when it comes time to formulate our apportionment approximate percentages are Labor Codes 4663 and 4664. Now, in terms of history, both of these laws are either new and or were rewritten in 2004 with the passage of Senate Bill 899, which dramatically changed apportionment as we knew it up to that point in time, such that permanent impairment payouts and permanent disability award payouts became greatly reduced to the point where the employer became only responsible for that portion of the impairment and therefore that portion of the disability that was directly due to the industrial injury. So the purpose of these new apportionment laws was to more accurately provide for monetary payouts wherein the employer was only responsible for the portion of the disability due to the industrial injury. And that makes sense, and that dramatically changed the apportionment determination as we knew it up to that point in time. And if you were around in 2004, 2005 when Senate Bill 899 passed, you'll know it was a great upheaval in the system. So let's take a look at both Labor Codes 4663 and 4664. 4663, and this was new language in 2004, it told us that the apportionment of permanent disability, and for our purposes we can use the term impairment in place of disability because we don't comment on disability, we comment on impairment. So let's substitute the word impairment for disability. Apportionment of the permanent impairment shall be based on causation. So when we have an examinee who is permanent and stationary that has a permanent impairment rating, we need to think to ourselves, what are all the causes of that permanent impairment? What are all the causes? The employer is only responsible for the portion that's directly due to the industrial injury. But when the examinee is permanent and stationary and has a permanent impairment rating, there could be many causes contributing to that final permanent impairment. And it's our job to parcel out what are those causes. So apportionment is based on causation. 4663 tells us that a physician who prepares a report addressing the issue of permanent disability due to a claimed industrial injury shall address in that report the issue of causation of the permanent disability. So in every single case wherein you provide a permanent impairment rating, you must by law, it says shall address in that report the issue of the causes, the many causes of the permanent disability, so that the parties can resolve the case monetarily and pay the examinee for his losses and close the books on the case. The system relies on us as medical evaluators to tell the parties what is the liability to the employer for the examinee's permanent impairment, for the examinee's losses, for the examinee's disability. The employer is responsible only for that portion of the loss that's due directly to the industrial injury. So that's Section A and Section B of 4663. Let's take a look at Section C. And Section C tells us that in order for a physician's report to be considered complete on the issue of permanent disability, the report must include, by law, an apportionment determination. And this is critical. A physician shall make an apportionment determination by finding, number one, what approximate percentage of the permanent disability was caused by the direct result of injury arising out of and occurring in the course of employment. And what's critical here for us to know, and this is something that should give you added confidence when it comes time to write your apportionment argument, is that the law allows us to use approximate percentages. What approximate percentage In other words, when it comes to apportionment determinations, everybody knows, and lawmakers knew when they passed this law, 4663, that it's impossible to come up with an exact, certain percentage. So the law has built in it some flexibility for us by allowing us to use approximate percentages. Now, what's interesting about this is, even though our percentages can be approximate, the parties rely on us for an exact number, And so you can't say, what I used to say in my report, since I relied on approximate percentages, I used to say things like, in my opinion, approximately 10 to 30% of the impairment is due to the industrial injury, and I would provide a range of values because it was an approximation, right? It was an approximation. And I approximated 10 to 30%, for example, to indicate that the lesser portion, 10 to 30, was due to the industrial injury, and the greater portion, 70 to 90, a range, the greater portion, the lesser portion, and the greater portion. And I learned that the parties, while we're allowed to provide approximate percentages, we have to do that by providing exact and specific numbers. So you would say approximately 10% of the permanent disability is the direct result of the injury, and 90%, approximately 90% of the permanent disability was caused by other factors, both before and subsequent to the industrial injury, including prior industrial injuries. Now notice, this law was rewritten in 2004, and this language here that requires an approximate percentage to be due to the industrial injury and an approximate percentage to be due to other factors, this law was specifically languaged to include a consideration of prior industrial injuries. Now notice that it doesn't say prior auto accident injuries, it doesn't say prior sports injuries, it doesn't say prior slip and fall injuries. It's specific to prior industrial injuries because lawmakers are well aware of the fact that many injured workers have multiple injuries, multiple incidences of industrial injuries for which they come back into the system over and over again. And this language of the law, this new language, requires us as qualified medical evaluators to give consideration to the impact of any prior industrial injury, to any impact that that injury may have on the current finding of permanent impairment. So lawmakers demand that we take a specific and hard look at the examinee's history of any prior industrial injuries. Okay, so this law, Labor Code 4663, allows us to apportion to any number of factors. They're called here other factors. They're called other factors. We can simply refer to all the things that contribute to an examinee's impairment at the permanent and stationary date as other factors. There's other factors on the one hand, and there's the direct result of the industrial injury on the other hand. And we're required to provide an approximate percentage of each. Okay? So that's Labor Code 4663. And then the next law, Labor Code 4664, has some very specific and very exacting language to deal with those examinees who have indeed had a prior industrial injury, and specifically who've had a prior award for permanent disability. So let's take a look at 4663. Okay, so now 4664 is very fascinating. 4664 tells us that the employer shall only be liable for the percentage of the permanent disability directly caused by the injury arising out of and occurring in the course of employment. And doesn't that make sense? I don't know how many of you are employers. I don't know if you've ever had a worker claim an industrial injury during the course of their employment with you. But if you are an employer, you would be in agreement that you should be responsible only for the portion of the impairment or disability that's a direct result of the injury that occurred in the course of employment. And this makes great sense. Now, this is critical, and Section B is something that you need to keep in mind at all times when you have an examinee who has a prior industrial injury. Section B tells us that if the applicant has received a prior award of permanent disability. Now, this does not apply to compromise and release. Okay, so there's two ways that cases settle in the California workers' compensation system. A small percentage of cases settle by way of permanent disability award, but a large percentage of cases settle by way of compromise and release. It's about 60% of cases settle by way of compromise and release, and only 40% of cases settle by permanent disability award. And it tells us in that percentage of cases, it shall be conclusively presumed that the prior permanent disability exists at the time of any subsequent industrial injury. The permanent disability that they had, for which they received a permanent disability award, exists into perpetuity if only on paper. In other words, now under new Labor Code 4664, an examinee cannot claim a medical rehabilitation. An examinee cannot say that after they received the permanent disability award that they then enjoyed a medical rehabilitation. Now, prior to 2005, we used to be able to sit with an examinee who would tell us that indeed, after they received the permanent disability award, they went on to change their diet, they started seeing the chiropractor, they started exercising, they adopted a vegan lifestyle, and they enjoyed a medical rehabilitation, meaning the effects of their injury disappeared and resolved, and they were medically rehabilitated. Therefore, that particular examinee could then suffer a new and subsequent industrial injury and receive a new unapportioned permanent disability award. Well, under new Labor Code 4664, the law now says no, there is no option for a medical rehabilitation, even when the examinee has actually factually enjoyed a medical rehabilitation, at least administratively. That permanent disability and every single aspect of it, from the pain to the positive objective examination findings to the limitations to activities of daily living, all of those components that went into the permanent disability award exist and persist forever. And this is something that we need to take into consideration when it comes time to provide our apportionment approximate percentages to other factors. This is an other factor. The prior permanent disability would be considered an other factor that would be apportioned out of the current impairment to leave the employer responsible only for the new impairment that's the direct result of the new industrial injury. Okay? So let's start to put this together and establish our formula and our formulation for creating our apportionment argument within the body of our report. So when it comes time for you to write the apportionment argument within the body of your report, you begin your argument with the conclusory portion of the opinion. The conclusory portion of the opinion can be phrased as follows. In my opinion, comma, and within reasonable medical probability, comma, X% of the permanent impairment is due to the industrial injury, and X% is due to other factors. Okay? So here in the conclusory portion, you give the reader of the report the conclusion, like the guy at the barbecue that says the 49ers suck. This is the conclusion. Now at the barbecue party, you would follow up with your friend and ask you, well, what is your reasons? Why do you say what you say about the 49ers? And similarly with regards to our reports, the readers of our reports are going to ask us, well, why do you say 50% is due to the industrial injury and 50% is due to other factors? And that's where we get into the substantial portion of the opinion. Now, the substantial portion of the opinion begins after the conclusory portion of the opinion with the following phrase. Reasons for this conclusion include, colon, and here you elaborate on your reasons, and you first cite the relevant facts that support your approximate percentages, your 50-50, your 60-40, and you give us some facts about the mechanism of injury. You give us some facts about the examinee's response to medical treatment. You give us some facts about the examinee's pre-existing conditions. You give us some facts that relate to any prior industrial injuries. And the facts that you support here, that you provide here, must not only be factual facts, they must be relevant facts. And facts become relevant when they support your opinion for a certain percentage. In other words, we're not just asking for facts, we're asking for facts that are relevant to your apportionment approximate percentages. Now, I have a great video available for you on YouTube. You can search for it in YouTube by typing in my name, Perry Carpenter, DC, and then type in mechanism of injury continuum. And there you'll see several ideas as to how relevant facts related to the mechanism of injury can contribute to a substantial opinion on your apportionment approximate percentages. So very, very valuable information related to the mechanism of injury. In addition to relevant facts, you want to support facts and reasons from the history, facts and reasons from the examination, and you want to put those together into how and why reasoning that supports your apportionment approximate percentages. And finally, you would conclude the substantial portion of your opinion by reassuring the reader of the report that the above opinion on the apportionment approximate percentages of 50% of the permanent impairment to be due to the industrial injury and 50% to be due to other factors is not based on guess, conjecture, surmise, or speculation. And when you review your apportionment approximate percentages, you should confirm to yourself that no portion of your reasoning is in any way based on guessing or speculating. And this serves as a final check and balance for you to confirm that your opinion rises to the high and lofty ideal of substantial medical evidence. Okay? So let's put this into a practical application as we bring this discussion to a close. And let me share with you an exercise that you can use in each and every evaluation to help you arrive at true and accurate apportionment approximate percentages. Okay, so what we have here is an apportionment check sheet, and this is a check sheet that you can use to qualify your apportionment approximate percentages as substantial medical evidence. Now, before we go over the check sheet, let's just revisit substantial medical evidence. And let me remind you that substantial medical evidence is a system adopted and incorporated and used down at the courts to help eliminate opinions and conclusions that aren't true, that aren't accurate. In other words, the criteria used to define an opinion or conclusion as substantial based on the conclusion of the Escobedo case, those criterion can be thought of as truth filters, And so for an opinion to pass through these several phases of filtration, truth filtration, by the time an opinion or conclusion falls out the bottom of this funnel of filtration, any opinion that falls out of the bottom of the funnel as a substantial opinion has a high likelihood of being a correct opinion, a true opinion, an accurate opinion. Because an opinion that's not true, that's not accurate, that's not correct, will not be able to pass through the filters of the funnel of the substantial medical evidence system. So for example, here's a check sheet that you can use to illustrate this principle. If you look here across the top of the check sheet, you have all of your possible apportionment approximate percentages. Here on the left end of the spectrum, you could opine that 100% of the impairment is due to the industrial injury and 0% is due to other factors. Or at the other end of the spectrum, you could conclude that 0% is due to the industrial injury and 100% is due to other factors. and you have every option in between. You have 90-10, 80-20, 70-30, etc., and all these options. So when you provide your apportionment approximate percentages, you want to ask yourself, of these percentages, of these options, all of these options up here, which ones can I provide to the readers of the report and to the parties that are based upon reasonable medical probability? Which of these apportionment approximate percentages have a 51% or greater likelihood of being true, of being accurate, and of being correct? And this first level of filtration, the reasonable medical probability filter, will filter out and retain and restrain several of your approximate percentages because they can't be cited within reasonable medical probability. So this is the first stage of the filtration system. So as an example, we had all of these options up here. Only a few of those options would survive the first level of filtration of reasonable medical probability. Of those remaining options, 0, 100, 60, 40, 40, 60, 100, 0, which of those approximate percentages can be supported by relevant facts? And we pass those percentages through the filtration system of relevant facts. Now, if these apportionment approximate percentages cannot be supported by relevant facts, they will get clogged up in the filter right here, and they won't pass through the filtration, the truth filter of relevant facts. And then we're left with fewer options. In this case, we're really only left, this is just an illustration, but we're only left with two options. 100% of the impairment is due to the industrial injury, and 0% due to other factors, or the opposite, 0% is due to the industrial injury, and 100% is due to other factors. And then we go through the next level of filtration, the adequate history and the adequate examination, and then we eliminate any opinions or conclusions that might be based on surmise, guess, speculation, or conjecture to arrive at one opinion that falls out the bottom of the system of the filters of substantial medical evidence. And there's a very, very high likelihood that because this opinion has survived the filtration system and has passed through each of these rigorous criteria, that this opinion is the accurate, true, and correct apportionment approximate percentages based upon the relevant facts, based upon an adequate history, based upon an adequate examination, based upon reasonable medical probability. The number that survives these filters is the substantial opinion that can be used by the judges and used by the courts and can be used to resolve the case. So you can use this check sheet in every single case wherein you have to provide an apportionment determination within your body of your report, and this check sheet will help you arrive at true, accurate, correct, and substantial apportionment approximate percentages. So doctors, I hope this helps you. Now, the apportionment determination, in other words, coming up with your apportionment approximate percentages, needs not really be that difficult at all. And qualified medical evaluators tell me that coming up with their apportionment approximate percentages is the part of the report that they dread and hate the most, and they just put it off and delay confronting the apportionment section of the report until the very last day when the report is due, and they must then confront and face the issue of the apportionment argument in the body of the report. But the important principles related to your apportionment approximate percentages is, number one, your apportionment approximate percentages can only be entertained once you have clearly and exactly described what is the apportionable impairment or disability. So be very, very clear as to what is your impairment argument in the body of your report. Once you have your impairment argument, whatever that may be, you can then start to consider what are the causes of this impairment. And there can be anywhere from a singular cause, meaning can be solely due 100% to the industrial injury, to any number of causes. There can be many, many contributors to the final permanent impairment, and we refer to all other contributors besides the industrial injury. All other contributors are simply lumped together and referred to as other factors. So we need your apportionment percentage to tell us what approximate percentage is due to the industrial injury and what approximate percentage is due to other factors. And you explain these numbers to us, and you support these numbers for us by giving us those numbers based on reasonable medical probability, number one, based on relevant facts, number two, based on an adequate history and an adequate examination. So always do your examination in complete accordance with the AMA guides. Number five, you provide for us the how and why reasons to support your numbers, your approximate percentage. How and why reasons to support the percentage due to the industrial injury, how and why reasons to support the percentage due to other factors, and you conclude by confirming to us in written form in a statement in your apportionment argument that the above opinions on the apportionment approximate percentages are not in any way based upon guess, conjecture, surmise, or speculation. And if you can do these things, and if you can get in the habit and in the rhythm of qualifying each and every opinion within the body of your report, and especially your apportionment approximate percentages as substantial medical evidence, you will always provide the true, the accurate, and the correct opinion upon which the case can be resolved. So doctors, I hope this helps you. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me on today's discussion of the anything goes rules of apportionment. I look forward to being with you on future sessions as well. For now, this is Dr. Perry Carpenter, and I look forward to being with you on our very next session.